think about it. Obama captured, I think, 26 and 21% of the white evangelical vote in 2008 and 2012, respectively, and he won those elections. Hillary Clinton, by comparison, got only 16% of the white evangelical vote in 2016, and she lost, as we know. We also know that elections are always won and lost at the margins. Most elections are quite tight. Electoral vote doesn't always correspond to popular vote. It certainly hasn't with Trump. So most analysts, frankly, agree that it would really help Kamala Harris and Tim Walz if they could break the Republican Party's hold on religious conservatives and at least get something closer to Obama's numbers. And that would really help them win in 2024.
Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, we're glad to have you. I'm your political host, Will Wright, joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well, thanks.
and we have returning with us Katherine Stewart. Which here's kind of the funny thing. Normally, I have the questions, and then I have your intro, and I forgot to do the intro to a little blurb for my intro, but I don't have to because you're just so fantastic, and you wrote a book called The Power Worshippers, which they turned into a documentary. Great, by the way. You're also a reporter. You write for New Republic and put out articles all the time and all these other publications. And you're just a rock star. So welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, what an introduction. I just want to talk about two things really quickly. My forthcoming book is titled Money, Lies, and God, Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. And that's with Bloomsbury. That's coming out in a few months again. And I just had a piece up on Religion News Service. I've been doing some writing for them about a kind of evangelical movement that is sort of supporting more progressive Democratic Party aligned positions. It's sort of so I'm really excited to talk about that. But I also just came back from the Democratic National Convention, and that was really, really quite exciting. And I spent time with that group of I would say either pro-Harris evangelicals or evangelicals and other Christians, Catholics included, who are also feel like their values are more aligned with the values and positions of the Democratic Party.
Got it. So just before I get into it, I'm curious, did you stay for the whole thing or just for the panel?
Oh, I stayed for the whole thing. It was really an extraordinary experience. It's frankly my first Democratic National. It was my first party convention,
really?
And it was exciting.
So you show up to these things, and I've never been to one myself, but I'd imagine it would be a lot like Comic-Con or something. I've been to Comic-Con, are there tons of characters and I don't know, just merch and all, explain, describe.
Well, first of all, there are these 4 connected hotels that host a lot of sort of side panels and speeches and things like that. I was very lucky to moderate an interfaith panel, which we can talk about a little later. But just in there's the United Center events in the evenings where you have all the official speeches and, the stuff that everybody watches on TV. But, the large, and we're talking about really big hotels. So, we were, I was at it's the McCormick Center, and you're walking down the hall, and there's the steel workers over there, and there are the educators over here, and there is a sort of environmental panel over here, and there's a small business owners panel over here. So there are all these different sectors of society that show up at these conventions to talk about the issues that matter to them and engage others on those issues. And it's just fascinating.
That is really, really awesome. Well, I do want to talk about the panel that you moderated. So maybe you could just give us a little bit of, broad overview of what was the panel about, who was on the panel, attendees, stuff like that.
Sure. So the goal was to hear from a group of lawmakers and public intellectuals on a wide variety of topics related to faith and politics, including religious freedom, the exploitation of faith for politics coming from the right, January 6th and its consequences. So I moderated, and on the panel were Congressman Jamie Raskin, Congressman Jared Huffman, Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver, and Dr. Khyati Joshi. She teaches at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and I actually have her book. It's wonderful. She's got this. I've got two books I want to show you guys. So first of all, this is Unthinkable. This is Jamie Raskin's book. It's an extraordinary book. It's about. The subtitle is Trauma, Truth, and the Trials of American Democracy, and it's really a story about January 6th and its aftermath woven in with a very personal and tragic story involving his family. And then Dr. Joshi's book is White Christian Privilege. She writes about the subtitle is The Illusion of Religious Equality in America. And so she writes about sort of concepts of religious freedom and how they apply very imperfectly across our society. So
That's, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just, I think it's fascinating, one, that you got to go to the Democratic National Convention. I'm thinking I would really like to go to one of these conventions at some point, Democrat. I would actually like to go to both of them at some point and kind of look at the difference between them, like how close they are and how different they are. Because I just wonder how much of the same tactics they use, like political lobbyists and political, strategists. I just wonder how much they overlap in terms of not necessarily the content, but the form and the ways in which they try to get people, they try to come at issues. It would be fascinating to me. And it's also very fascinating to me that you had this group of evangelicals that were anti-Trump. I'm not as surprised by that because I have my own personal feelings of Trump, and I consider myself a very strong evangelical, conservative, politically, theologically Christian. And so I'm not surprised by that. But what it is, this kind of more pro-Kamala, it's not just anti-Trump, it's pro-Kamala. Kind of help us understand that, wrap our heads around that. What is it about Kamala that they're saying that they like, that they feel like represents their values? What's going on within this movement? I'm very curious.
Well, I think most American Christians, frankly, see their faith as something more than just a tool that can be used to exploit and to crush others and to dehumanize others. And this particular group of leaders who they see the Democratic agenda of care for the common good as really aligned with their understanding of the faith. And they're trying to connect with other faith voters and assure them that they don't have to vote for Trump to be a faithful Christian. One panelist on a sort of a vote common good Catholic, there's a kind of Catholic panel, said, "You're not going to go to hell if you vote Democrat." And it sounds sort of like a joke, but I think for, you and I have probably both been in spaces at churches where the pastor will say, if you want to be a good Christian, you have to vote Republican. Pastors aren't really supposed to take sides in these political fights, but some of them, unfortunately, these days on the right, they do. And the Christian nationalist movement gives them a lot of tools to help them do that. So that's unfortunately what a lot of conservative Christians are hearing these days in their churches or in faith-based spaces or even in their communities. So, I wrote a piece about that cohort, and it really draws on a very simple piece of electoral math. Think about it. Obama captured, I think, 26 and 21% of the white evangelical vote in 2008 and 2012, respectively, and he won those elections. Hillary Clinton, by comparison, got only 16% of the white evangelical vote in 2016, and she lost, as we know. We also know that elections are always won and lost at the margins. Most elections are quite tight. Electoral vote doesn't always correspond to popular vote. It certainly hasn't with Trump. So most analysts, frankly, agree that it would really help Kamala Harris and Tim Walz if they could break the Republican Party's hold on religious conservatives and at least get something closer to Obama's numbers. And that would really help them win in 2024.
Yeah. So Mike, help me kind of understand, especially like the number stuff. And I'm not a big numbers person, but I think that the percentages that you quoted are relevant because, so Trump got 80% plus of the evangelical vote. Obama
81% white evangelical vote in 2020. And frankly, I think it was a little bit higher in 2016. I think it was a little bit higher in 2024, but there was such an outpouring of support either for Biden or, I think in many instances, frankly, against his agenda that he still lost the election.
Yeah. And like so those numbers are votes, but like it wouldn't necessarily be fair to say that 81% of American white evangelicals like support Trump, would it? Much in the same way that, 26% of white evangelicals, support Obama. Like, but if I'm confusing you, please let me know. But I'm just trying to wrap my head. Like, are the percentages of votes that are going to a candidate representative of the demographic of America as a whole, as far as kind of where they fit politically?
No, I mean, this is a movement that punches above its political weight because it gets out the vote in disproportionate numbers. When we're looking at numbers, I think about someone like George Barna. He's an evangelical pollster, and he pointed out that a group that he calls Sagecons, or strategically active governments. Sagecons, it stands for like really active conservative voters of faith. Governance engaged conservatives are a minority of the population, but they vote in disproportionate numbers, and in a country where that their numbers are frankly shrinking in America is what he points out. But if they can turn out to vote in disproportionate numbers of large numbers vote, then they can dominate in election cycles. And in a country where you got 40% of Americans, or 50% even, don't bother to turn out to vote, and a certain number have their votes basically, I would say, stolen from them through race-based gerrymandering, voter suppression tactics, and the like, you really don't need to have a majority of the population to dominate in election cycles. You just need a disproportionately active, engaged minority of voters to win. So that's what we've been looking at in the last few election cycles. I mean, I remember Ralph Reed. A lot of the way I do my research is I go to right-wing gatherings, religious right gatherings, and strategy meetings. And Ralph Reed, who's one of the movement's sort of most engaged strategists, and he said, pay no attention to the numbers. Our numbers are shrinking. All that matters is who turns out on election day, and he's absolutely right about that.
Well, like how are like evangelicals for Harris like different than like evangelicals for Trump? I mean, it seems like, evangelicals for Trump, it's like, okay, abortion, gay marriage, like it seemed like there's very like definable terms, like, we'll vote for you if you do X. Like, what sort of the evangelicals for Harris, requests, demands, or differences?
Oh, there's so much to unpack here about that. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about evangelicals for Trump first. I mean, when we're looking at why they vote for the leadership that they do and how they can justify throwing their support behind a leader that's so transparently amoral, like a Trump, and someone who's so divisive and frankly, engages in this kind of performative cruelty and dehumanization, a lot of it is because, look, we have to acknowledge that Christian nationalist movement is a leadership-driven movement. It's not driven by the rank and file. And one of the ways they get the rank and file to vote the way they want them to vote is by pushing these, small set of culture war issues. So it's, I get email from all these organizations, every day, and it's like transports all the time. Now, is this an issue, by the way? Whatever you think of these issues, whatever the merits are of the issue of, preserving, men, women, sports, whatever, is this an issue that really involves like bread and butter issues of the ordinary, everyday American? Absolutely not. But they push the issue because they've done their polling. They're very good at finding wedge issues that they can push to get people, identity issues that get people to vote a certain way. I think of those issues as almost like the shiny baubles, or like a laser pointer cat toy. Those cat toys where you got like a red line, a red dot that goes all over the place, and the cat jumps.
Those are awesome.
You don't have to explain that, Katherine. We all know how lazy, because like we've all tortured we've all
tortured our cats that way, right? Exactly. I don't have cats. I'm a catless child lady, actually. Catless child lady. That's me. But I've seen other people's cats. I see how they play with those laser-pointed cat toys. I'm like, that's the little culture war issues that they're, doing over here. So nobody will look at their larger agenda. This is a movement that, I really, that's funded by a cadre of billionaires, or the multi-millionaires. I really get into this in my forthcoming book, Money, Lies, and God. The movement gets a huge amount of funding from these extremely wealthy people. And this is, by the way, going to lead into the opposite group, the sort of pro-Harris or pro-Democratic Party of voters of faith. These billionaires who are funding the Christian nationalist movement and the Christian right, they want low taxes or no taxes for the rich. They want policies that justify their enormous accumulations of wealth. They want minimal regulation of the environment because a lot of them made their, billionaire fortunes through extractive industries like oil and gas or fracking or things like that. But they know that it's going to be, and they're supporting policies that actually make it so much harder for American families to succeed economically. They want to eliminate unions. They want to, eliminate rights for the workforce. They want to eliminate things like, fair pay and equal pay and things like that. But they know that those aren't going to be winning issues for the rank and file. People who are struggling to pay their grocery bills are not going to be paying for policies that benefit the 0.001% at the top. So they get them distracted with these culture war issues. And that sort of leads into the contrast. So the sort of voters of faith, the sort of faith leaders that I met at the Democratic National Convention, I'm thinking about groups like Vote Common Good, the New Evangelicals, Evangelicals for Harris, and other groups. They really care about issues that emphasize social gospel, caring for the least of these, caring for families, caring for, the ordinary people in society. So they're looking for a party that will support things like fair wages, food security, policies that are going to help sustain American families' access to adequate health care. Some of them spoke about how health care is a right. And so those are the issues. And then, there's this fellow named Tim Whitaker. He's just wonderful. He is a creator of the New Evangelicals. And he said, I'm going to quote him here, but I don't have it in front of me. He said something to the effect of, we really support, non-dehumanization. And that's really important. Like, if you think about a leader like Trump, who has said things at his rallies like, the greatest enemy we face is not our foreign enemies, as dangerous as they may be. The greatest enemy is the enemy within. And you all know who I'm talking about. And he's speaking very specifically about Democrats. And at his rallies and at religious right gatherings, you have other speakers talk about anyone to the left of them, including moderate Republicans, as they call them, satanic, demonic, under the control of Satan. They'll dismiss anyone who doesn't agree with them as a woke communist, which is absurd. But these are like horrible, dehumanizing characterizations of our fellow Americans. And you really can't see the kind of polarization that we see in our politics today without understanding that it's largely coming from one side. On the Democratic side, I've been in more sort of, I would say, moderate liberal spaces where we're always encouraged to talk to the other side, find issues of common ground. We need to understand them in order to be able to communicate and express to them the issues that matter to us. And on the other side, I don't hear any of that. All I hear is they're an apocalyptic threat to the nation. They're all a bunch of, communists and socialists, and they're, demonic and satanic. And this kind of dehumanizing rhetoric is really toxic for our society. I mean, it sort of reminds me of some of the topics of the panel that I moderated. I started the conversation by pointing out that leaders of the movement argue that liberalism is empty and nihilistic and leads people to have really unfulfilled and miserable lives without meaning. And this is sort of the motivation behind J.D. Vance's sort of childless cat lady meme. Now, we know this to be wrong. Like a liberal democratic society can be rich, filled with meaning, and can help people find their purpose. But we need specifics. So I started off the panel by asking panelists for their positive visions for a liberal and just and values-rich society. And their answers were really spectacular. I would say Cleaver and Raskin addressed the question first, and they really talked about, the values of democracy, the sort of very special values, and the fact this is a really beautiful experiment. The values of equality and justice were not a given at the time that America was founded. I mean, obviously, those principles have been applied imperfectly over time, but they remain ideals to work for. And they talked about how to convey those values and imbue the message with meaning and purpose.
Yeah, that's really good. It's like there's two kind of sides to this from what I'm hearing from you, and even looking at the article that you wrote about the Christian, like the evangelicals for Harris. Like, one is that Harris has this alignment with social gospel values, values that align with welfare for the marginalized, some kind of healthcare reform so that people have access to this, all being made in the image of God, that kind of idea that could have some kind of biblical principle behind it, right? That there's this really strong support that Harris has for social gospel, the gospel essentially made real in people's lives through policy changes, things that are enacted that actually help the value of their life increase. Or
the notion of the common good.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other side of this is Trump's character that seems to be contrary to Christian teachings, right? In the way that it's framed, right here. And just thinking about this, I think a lot of people that I've talked to, if people that support Trump, when I would say something like, hey, their value, like, what about like his values? Like, don't you feel like he's kind of immoral, or, this or that issue? And they'll say, well, where did you get that from? Well, Reddit and, I don't know, Washington Post or, whatever. Oh, well, there you go. That's your issue right there. It's in the Washington Post or the failing New York Times or whatever it is, right? In this essentially this biased kind of, or understood to be biased way of communication, these organizations. And so they basically are like, hey, look, yeah, they're just saying that because they want to make him look out to be bad. So what is your response?
Go listen. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to jump in. We just have to listen to people who worked with him. His own vice president, Mike Pence, said he has put himself above the law. Generals that have worked with him have said he represents a threat to our country. A number of people, some of whom actually spoke at the Democratic National Convention, who worked with him closely, say he's a danger to America. And I think people don't talk often enough about and we talk a lot about the domestic issues, but we don't look at the foreign policy issues. I mean, he really cozies up to autocrats around the world. He thinks he's going to negotiate with Putin. You don't negotiate with a leader like Putin. I mean, Putin will lie and then he'll do what he wants, and this is he doesn't seem to be capable of guarding our national security secrets. And he tried to oppose a peaceful transition of power. He actually tried to overthrow our democracy and stage a coup. I mean, just even listening to his people, say what you want about Mike Pence, but he is a true believer. Sometimes, when you look at this movement, sometimes there are people you think, well, that's a true believer. And then there's some you think, well, they're just cynically kind of doing it for the power and the money and the access to to all the things they can get. But I think Mike Pence is a true believer, and he spoke out, very, very strongly against Trump.
So we spoke with Olivia Troy on a number of occasions, and she's wonderful. And I remember the first time we spoke with her, I asked her about that because she was basically his Homeland Security advisor in the White House, and I'm like, is Mike Pence really Christian? Or is this like a gig? And she's like, oh yeah, no, he's the real deal. Like he starts every meeting with a prayer, like true to form. Like he's probably like if you were to make a caricature of what a white Christian looks like he would be it. Yeah. So definitely, I mean, and I never really quite understood that, like, Trump's own vice president isn't going to vote for the guy.
No.
No. How does that make sense in anybody's brain? That I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to go down a Trump rabbit hole. But what I do want to ask about though is, like, you've been covering this stuff for I don't know how long, years maybe.
15 years.
Yeah. Like, has there ever been a movement kind of like evangelicals, rising up on the Democrat Party side, as you're kind of seeing now?
I don't know exactly what you mean by the question, but we have to think about somebody like Jimmy Carter, right? Mm-hmm. Who was also evangelical, very faithful American who was trying to sort of realize his religious values, I think, in many regards as a leader. But he was really opposed by a more fundamentalist side of that movement. Look, every religion in America is incredibly diverse. Evangelicalism in America is incredibly diverse. I first saw that diversity within evangelicalism right at the very beginning, 15 years ago, when I started researching this movement, because a group, an after-school Bible study club called the Good News Club, came to my daughter's public elementary school in Santa Barbara. And the leaders of that organization, called the Child Evangelism Fellowship, they put these clubs in public elementary schools across the country, targeting children who are too young to read, with the message that without a certain understanding of Jesus, they're going to go to hell. And the amazing thing was, when they came to our school in Santa Barbara, the Cold Spring School, the people who were opposed first to this group coming into our school were evangelical Christians who, who are like, met with the Good News Club leaders, and they said, we too are evangelical Christians. We believe in the Great Commission, but you're really not right for our school. And so what they tried to do is arrange for this group to meet in the church, the evangelical church, right next door to the school, like literally next door. And the Good News Club leaders at the same time, better space, the Good News Club leaders declined and said, well, we don't want to be in the church. We want to be in the school. And that is really what started me down my path. I thought, well, what do my evangelical friends know about this club that I don't? Why don't these folks want to be in the church? It's gorgeous. Why, and what do they really believe? What makes them so concerning to the evangelical friends that I have here in Santa Barbara and that I know? And so and by the way, why is it legal and constitutional for them to be in the public school in the first place, given our separation of church and state? So that really sort of set me down my path. But the larger point is, evangelicalism in America is very diverse. And, in a way, it's a blunt term to describe a lot of different things. So there are a lot of different categories within that. You've got, when we look at sort of different groups that now make up the sort of pro-Trump faction, they're not, by the way, all evangelical Christians and not even all Christian. I mean, the movement would be nowhere without a cadre of ultra-conservative Catholics. Let's just look at the Supreme Court capture, look at the sort of right-wing legal ecosystem. The movement draws fresh energy from Pentecostal and charismatic Christians, which is, again, a very diverse, category, but a sector of that movement is very, I would say, prone to being influenced by messaging of Christian nationalism, sort of exclusionary nationalism and dominionism. And some of the movement funders, by the way, are not Christian at all. I think about Barry Seid. He's a Jewish billionaire from Chicago who formed a foundation called the Marvel Freedom Trust. He put Leonard Leo in charge of it. And he donated $1.6 billion. I believe this is the largest political donation in U.S. history. So what they can do, and he's devoted to right-wing politics. Leonard Leo, as you guys know, is has headed up the Federalist Society, which plays an outsized role in shaping the courts. And he's got, all these organizations that are related to court capture that, Leo does, that he's involved with, and he's sort of known as a money man on the Catholic right. So Barry Seid, this Jewish billionaire, creates the Marble Freedom Trust, puts Leonard Leo in charge of it, and they can spend like $230 million a year on right-wing politics or religious right politics, without even touching the nut. I mean, that's an extraordinary donation. And then other billionaires, when you really dig into them, or other funders of the movement, really dig into them, as I do in my forthcoming book, Money, Lies, and God, you see that, are they really interested in the sort of so-called, values issues that they claim to support? Or some of them seem to worship nothing, I would say, more than money. If you have any doubts about that, you should just Google Betsy DeVos's yachts. That's yachts, plural. It's just for fun. Google Betsy DeVos's yachts. And then there's another family. I mean, there are other families in that book that I write about that, when you really get to know what they're all about, they frankly seem quite atheistic or just materialistic,
I'm super stoked for your book, to be honest.
You.
Especially about the Leonard Leo Barry. So we had Andy Kroll on, who broke the story at ProPublica right when the story came out, and my mind was just like what's going on here? So yeah, I'm super excited for it.
Yeah, Andy Kroll has done that also wonderful story about the Ziklag group, which is, years ago I got somebody sent me an invitation to one of their gatherings, and there were, you have to, check 3 boxes. You have to be, a Bible-believing Christian. You have to be, on board with your mission, and you have to have assets in excess of something like, $25 million per year, as an income, of over 25 million. So if you think about the kind of fortune required to be a member of the Ziklag group, where you're generating over $25 million a year, it's like a group for the ultra, ultra, ultra wealthy. But here's the interesting thing about the Ziklag group. And I wrote about this, I think, for the New York Times and also for Religion Dispatches. They're really on board with the Seven Mountains agenda. So the Seven Mountains Dominionist agenda, for listeners who, aren't too familiar with it, it's the idea that conservative Christians of a certain type should dominate all, they call them mountains or molders of culture, which includes, things like education, government, finance, and arts and entertainment and the like. And the sort of people who see Peter Wagner and Lance Wallnau, the folks who sort of, popularized the notion of the Seven Mountains Dominionism, see this as taking dominion back from Satan, as though if finance is not dominated by ultra-conservative, Republican Christians, and they're, satanic. They're under the dominion of Satan. Or if your kid is attending a school where the teacher isn't, of the right ideological, religious, and political approach, then that school is under the dominion of Satan. So these very wealthy, multi-millionaires and billionaires are collaborating in this project, the Ziklag group, to donate their money to take over those supposed 7 mountains But here's the funny thing. People often talk about the Christian nationalist movement as being about theological, concepts. And to some degree it is, although a lot of different concepts can sort of fit in with that movement. But really it's more political identity. I mean, I've had people who are sources in the movement will say to me, it's really more about your political identity than your religious beliefs. I believe that to be true. It's the exploitation of faith for politics and power.
Yeah, I definitely am. What is the word I'm looking for? Like, I'm sympathetic to the things that you're saying. Like, for instance, when you talk about something like this person donated, the largest single donation in the history of American politics at 1.6 billion or whatever. What was it? 1.3?
1.6.
So 1.6 billion. That's a lot of money. I mean, yeah. I mean that I'd like $1.6 billion. By the way, they can donate if they'd like to my church. It's called River City Underground. That we're doing all sorts of great stuff in the Richmond area. They can go to the website and donate. But what I was thinking though is, why is it like? So I hear that and I'm like, oh wow, that's a lot of money. But donating a lot of money doesn't seem to me inherently bad. For instance, if it was that donation made to the Democratic National Convention or something like that, and I know that there are, right, obviously large donations made to Democratic causes and stuff like that. What is it specifically about this that should be concerning for me or for Will? Why should we care that this guy that has a bunch of money wanted to donate it? What's going on there that is so concerning?
It's not that that people donate their money to causes they care about. Everybody, a lot of people donate money. I mean, my donations will be a lot smaller, and most will. But
same.
This guy is a kind of a libertarian billionaire who wants, again, policies that justify the extraordinary accumulation of wealth that he's facing. I remember when, and they're doing it in a way to sort of, life is getting a lot harder for a lot of American families. I think about, I was in Youngstown, Ohio, and yes, we've had, issues with steel, et cetera, but it used to be you could make a reasonable middle-class salary. You could afford a nice house, maybe not a big house, but something decent and dignified. You could, when the kids were little, you didn't have to have 2 working parents. You could have one, and they could absolutely meet the daily expenses and expenses for having a nice middle class life. You had strong public schools, and people could have decent lives, and we don't have that anymore. Because we're in the midst of an extraordinary, like a second Gilded Age. I think a lot of people don't understand how the very rich really live. The economic gains over the past decades have gone largely to the top, leaving like just a small amount to divide among the bottom, I would say 95%. So there's a group, in the top, I would say 10% of our society that's still doing pretty well, but the bottom, 90% of our society is just seeing life get so much harder and more expensive. It's just so much harder to secure a kind of decent middle class life for people, and it's unleashed an epidemic of status anxiety. I think a lot of people feel that a good life or a life of dignity, not a rich life, just a life of dignity, is slipping away from them. And that makes people very anxious. And so I think that makes people, frankly, prone to the false promises of a demagogue like Trump.
I appreciate you. You mentioned something kind of at the top about evangelicals voting for Democrats and whatnot, and it made me think like we spoke to a person not too long ago, conservative, but they were a pastor too, and I mentioned to them that I'm a Democrat, and I'm a Christian, and I've been told that I'm not going to heaven because of like my political beliefs. And they seemed like completely shocked. Like they were just like, what? Like, no, really? No way. And I'm like, I've also been told I'm not going to heaven because I wear a hat. And when I used to do worship at the church.
We all know that's true, Will.
So mind you, here I am playing guitar, singing, how great is our God or whatever. And like someone in the crowd is like, that dude is not going to heaven because he's got a hat on while he's singing to God, and I'm like,
it's really confusing to me.
Well, because there's a verse in the Bible that says like men shouldn't have covering. I don't know. I mean, I think it was taken out of context.
Which version of the Bible? I mean, look at the Old Testament.
Yeah. So I understand the sort of, I don't know, ridicule, like being ostracized for, being an evangelical supporting Harris or whatever. But like, I'd love to kind of just get your thoughts on like, what's been the reaction kind of from the broader evangelical community, about, Christians, heaven forbid, voting Democrat.
Well, among the right wing of the community, I would say there's been a lot of pushback. I mean, I speak to folks like Jim Ball and Doug Padgett, and they get a lot of hate mail. They get a lot of really nasty messages, and some leaders have actually had threats that they've had to deal with that they have to take very seriously. People get very angry with them and say they're going to go to hell, et cetera, or accuse them of not being Christian or being satanic, demonic, et cetera. And then, you have people like a lot of pushback in the media, which frankly is disproportionate. I mean, this is a David and Goliath situation, right? Like, so these folks who were operating on shoestring budgets, not getting a ton of money, and really just engaging in the most basic messaging campaign, like saying, you're not going to go to hell if you vote Democrat, and these are the values we care about. You get like this massive overreaction on the right where Fox News gave a ton of time to Meg Basham, who wrote a book about, claiming that more liberal-leaning pastors have been bought off, and which is kind of a joke. And then and talking about.
Do you see the screen?
Shepherds for sale. We're supposed to interview her at some point.
Oh, that sounds
Megan,
really...
we'd love to have you on.
That'd be fun.
To talk about this.
That'd be fun. Amazing thing is Meg Basham, and she says, how dare they, weaponize Christianity. Meg Basham is well aware that the religion has been thoroughly weaponized on the right. Thoroughly weaponized, and the amounts of money involved. And this goes back to your question, Josh, about what's the problem about people donating money. Fact is, a lot of this is on the left. It's not really going in any significant way to, the amounts of money involved in the sort of religious left are so low. It's just so low compared with the religious right, which we're talking like, I just think about the Alliance Defending Freedom. It's just one organization. It's only one organization that is part of a much larger right-wing legal ecosystem, and their annual operating budget is over $102 million a year. I heard that from their vice president of communications. Wow. That's just one organization. Out of multiple organizations, and the right-wing legal ecosystem is just one part of a much larger, I would say, organizational infrastructure of the Christian nationalist movement. When I say left, I mean very broadly moderate, liberal, even conservative, but moderate conservative. liberal left, it's just a teeny fraction, and so.
Yeah, I was going to say that I might have to have Andrew Seidel back on because he wrote a phenomenal book, American Crusader, and it's like everything that you're saying, like he chronicles in that book, and I'd be curious if one day he's going to write one for the left. I doubt it because like you said. Like left-wing evangelicals either don't have enough money or don't know how to organize properly. I'm not sure which one it is.
I think that a lot of money buys a lot of organization. And,
absolutely.
And here's the other thing. Anybody who's been in a group of disputatious liberals and progressives knows how hard it is to get everybody on board. It's like herding cats. And then there's a sort of, they call it the narcissism of small differences. Like, oh, you don't agree with me like all the time, or we're different in this one issue, we're going to have a fight about it. And on the right, it's not that they're all unified all the time because there are these different groups. Like the funders have a totally different agenda than the rank and file. And frankly, in many instances, a different agenda than the religious right leaders who are sort of serving to do a lot of organization for the movement. Who also, by the way, may have a different agenda from the rank and file. So there are these sort of differences, but one thing they do is unite a lot. And last kind of, when it's necessary, they say there's no victory without unity. Sorry about the helicopter noise.
Is that 5-0 above you? Looking.
And the other thing is they, like in the last few years, I've started to hear this thing that they'll say at these religious right conferences. They talk about Ronald Reagan, and they say, Ronald Reagan said, the person who agrees with you 80% of the time is your 80% friend, not your 20% enemy. And they're doing this to remind one another, we need to unite because there's no victory without unity. And frankly, this is a lesson that I think the moderate liberal left could benefit from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I would love to just ask you, this will be my last question for you. But, thinking about the role of religion in the public life and even kind of some of the work that you've done and talked about with the blurring, right, of the lines between church and state, the push for more religious influence in the public sphere and in public institutions. How would you kind of address the argument that the influence of religious values is kind of part of the American tradition to some extent? Yeah. And excluding religious perspectives from the public square could undermine, that moral fabric of the nation. Because I know a lot of Christians, people that I talk to, that what they're concerned about is really the moral soul and the moral fabric of the nation. There are caricatures, there are people that don't care, but most people that I know, conservative people, they want people to flourish. They want everyone to flourish. They feel like if we move away from the kind of morals that have, they are used to and would, be proponents of. So, right, there's already that bias in there, no doubt. But I think everyone's trying to figure out what the moral fabric of the nation should be and define that moral vision. So what is that balance there with bringing your religious convictions into the moral sphere and in the public square and trying to shape the moral vision of a nation or of a culture? Kind of feels like everyone's trying to do that. So what would you how would you respond to that argument?
It's a great question, Josh. Thank you for asking that. I think that leaders can express their religious values in the public square while still acknowledging that we have a religious diversity in our country and acknowledging the fact that we are a religiously pluralistic nation. Look, even within Christianity, we're incredibly diverse in our country. And most religions have a concern for the common good. And I think you can argue for, you can sort of express your own faith while still, without erasing the fact that we have a religiously pluralistic country. I also think that, that sense of the common good is really important. And unfortunately, there are, I would say, some fundamentalist faiths that take a really zero-sum approach. They say, if you're not with us, you're the enemy. And I don't think that fundamentalisms of all types, often do that. They say you're either with us or you're against us. You're one of the pure or the impure. And if you don't agree with this agenda, you need to be crushed. And that is not an argument for the common good. I would also encourage people to look at the sort of conditions that are required for human flourishing, conditions that are required, like, what is it that keeps families together? What is it that makes people happy and productive? I think a lot of us want the same things. We want, a secure and prosperous country, where people feel, the conditions are there for happiness and for human flourishing. And, putting your faith in a leader, I think character really matters. Putting your faith in a leader who is so devoid of character, and who doesn't seem to embody any of the values that you purport to support is probably not a good idea. It's probably not a step in the right direction.
No. Okay. We're almost out of time. So your new book, when does it come out? When can people start pre-ordering? Just help our audience understand where they can, help support you.
Thank you so much, you guys, by the way, for this great show. My new book is titled Money, Lies, and God: Inside the Movement to Destroy American Democracy. It's available for pre-order on Amazon and Bookshop and elsewhere. And it's coming out in early 2025. And look, it's relevant regardless of who wins the 2024 presidential election. This is a movement that has the sort of anti-democratic movement. It's not, I go beyond just talking about the religious right. It's really about different features of the war on democracy, including disinformation, conspiracism, a sort of agenda of the funders who, again, many of them, when you really dig into their lives, some of them are quite atheistic, but they really don't believe in representative government rooted in equality. They don't seem to care about, many of them don't seem to care about the common good.
Did you have to go undercover to write this book?
I think the term undercover is overheated. I just show up. I just show up and I don't use a fake name or disguises or anything. I just go as me.
You're like, I'm Kate Stewie.
No, I don't do that. No.
Well,
I think that, mainly what I really try to do is just listen to what people say.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, thank you again, Katherine. This has been eye-opening, awesome. I just love just chatting with you anyways, because you're so smart.
Likewise.
And to our audience, make sure you pre-order her book. I'm going to do that as soon as we get off this interview. And everybody out there, make sure you keep your conversations not right or left, but up. And we'll see you next time. Take care.